So Ray Martin, I'm really excited to have this conversation for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, you were super patient with me, and that's not one of the reasons
Okay.
why I'm excited about it. But you were super patient in trying to make this happen. And in my tumult of a life, we finally, thankfully, got it together. And you're doing me the honor of coming to me from the UK, and where you said it is sweltering hot.
It
And
is.
so I just want to welcome you, and let's talk about you. Tell me a little bit about your story, your background.
Well, I think I reached out because of the publication of Life Without a Tie, which is a book I took me 7 years to write, but 14 years to live. What's in the story of the book? I think I grew up like most people do, following the what I would call I used to call it the mainstream version of life, but someone else I heard on a podcast recently referred to it as an off the shelf life story. Which is quite a nice phrase. So I was
Yeah.
following this off the shelf life story, which was my parents always told me, if you want to be happy in life, you've got to get a good job, you've got to get a really good wife, a house, have some kids, and you get the car and everything, and then you're happy. And so I never questioned that logic or wisdom. I thought I'd trust them. That's what everyone seems to do. And so I found myself following that life, and I became a CEO of a company I founded in the 90s, and I even did it pretty well, and won an award in England from the Daily Telegraph as being Business Leader of the Year in
What kind of company
2002.
was it?
There's a management consulting
Oh,
training, kind of it's providing services in the corporate world to large organizations who constantly have to develop the talent that leads their organization and sort of drive performance in the business through people. So it was kind of a fascinating area to work in, because I'd always been fascinated my whole life in what makes human beings tick, what makes us motivated or demotivated, what makes us, creative or not, those kinds of things. So I'd always been fascinated by that. So I was pursuing all of that, and my business partner, who I created the company with, was the woman I was married to. So it was lovely. It was like all of our business and life was all merged together, and it was brilliant. Until one day where she suddenly came back from a business meeting in 2003 and said, I'm leaving you and I'm leaving the company. And it was really sudden. I didn't see it coming. It was like someone sort of just wrenched in and ripped my heart out. It was really painful, I remember at the time. And my father got very unwell at the same time, and he passed away shortly afterwards. So within 3 or 4 months, my dad had died. I'd lost my marriage, was going to come to an end. I was out of my home, and life just didn't look the same, Michael. I was on the floor, wondering what to do. And someone suggested to me, why don't you take a sabbatical for 6 months and reflect on everything that's happening? And at first I said, oh, that's a crazy idea. I'm not doing that. So it was so far away from my reality, what I was used to. But a couple of events happened that I didn't expect. And then after those, it was kind of like, yeah, this is not such a bad idea. So I started to minimalize my life. I sold the house that I was living in London, which was too big for me on my own. And that gave me the challenge of dealing with what was in it, all the things that we'd accumulated and bought. So I either sold or gave away everything I had and left myself with a bag of clothes and a laptop, and decided to go backpacking around Asia for 6 months, thinking 6 months is easily enough for me to reflect, get more wisdom and insight, and come back to London and get a new home and start again, something. Well, of course, life isn't always going according to plan. I think John Lennon said it beautifully in one of his songs, Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans.
for sure.
And after 6 months, I wasn't quite ready to come back. I just did a first Vipassana 10-day meditation retreat in a Buddhist monastery, and it had blown my mind, and I was in a different zone. And I really wanted to continue to learn about meditation and mindfulness. So I stayed on, and then I started a fundraising organization to raise money for an elephant sanctuary and an orphanage in Nepal. And to do that, I started to run marathons in my 50s. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, my 6-month sabbatical ended up taking 14 years. And I returned to the UK in 2019.
Wow.
And then I spent about 2 years finishing up the writing of the book about those 14 years. And that's what a lot of people are interested in, the wisdom that was gained from that journey.
It's such an interesting story. I think when one thinks about, having their life ripped up
Yeah.
and set on fire
Yeah.
out of the clear blue sky,
Yeah.
it's like it seems to me you have two choices,
Yeah.
you know,
Probably
sti-
more than two, but let's say two.
well, right. From the standpoint of, you can sit and wallow in the misery,
Yeah.
or you can choose to get up and move,
Yeah.
do something, and in your case, what you did was from the crucible of pain, you said, okay, I'm heading to Asia and I'm just going to take time to kind of find who I am again. But you also find people who will, they'll self-medicate, right?
Yes.
They'll go into, terrible depressions, things like that. And their pain either isolates them from life or makes them bitter, angry, and non-productive people.
Yeah.
So, so when I say it's one of two ways, of course,
Yeah.
there's a million things that one can do, but one is action, one is inaction. One is,
Yes.
taking the reins and saying, let me find out, what's going on inside, or I'm just going to sit in misery. And it kind of reminds me of some of the men I've met in Chapter X, some being, I'm going to use this time to explore and refine who I was
Yeah.
to see who I can become, versus
Yeah.
those who say, you know what, my work life is over, my life is over. My life now is I'll sit and watch Netflix or CNN or something, and that's my life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So-
I mean, I had a few thoughts as you were talking, because I was thinking back to the time when it happened, and I have to be honest with anyone who's listening. I wasn't in a state to act straight away. I was like broken for quite
Sure.
a long time and paralyzed with inaction. Didn't want to do anything. Didn't want to see anyone. Didn't want to think. I really wanted to be swallowed up whole for a while. But then I also started to think about why this had all happened, because if I'm really honest with myself, I wasn't really happy in being a CEO of a company. It looked great, and it's like really well paid, and I won the approval of a lot of my friends, family, and had lots of admirers for it. But I read this book by a lady called, I don't know if you've ever come across it. It's a really profound book, because she's a hospice nurse who works in Australia, and so she only ever spends time with people in the last days or weeks of their life. And she asks them all the same question, Michael. She says, what do you most regret about your life? And she said, I could tell you from all the answers, they all say the same 5 things. Doesn't matter whether they were a millionaire or a janitor. It's always the same 5 things. And the number one thing she said was, what do you think it was? I'll see if you would guess.
I don't know if I mean, I do know that none of the regrets were I should have been in the office more.
That was number 2.
That was one of the regrets.
I wished I hadn't worked so hard. was
Right,
number 2.
exactly. I wish I'm saying the one that wasn't is that I wish I would have worked more, and
Yeah.
I would have spent more time in the office. Spending more time with family or doing things that were of
that's
my
in there.
sole purpose. Being with other people that I loved.
You're kind of there. She
Yeah.
said the number one regret that people had was, I wished I'd lived my life true to myself and
Okay.
not the life that others expected of me.
Yeah.
And I looked at myself and I thought, do you know what? That's me.
Yeah.
I'm living the life others expected of me. It's not what I would have chosen myself.
Yeah.
And so all of that destruction kind of gave me a chance to acknowledge that and actually tell the truth about that. So it was a kind of gift in a way. But it took me a year and a half to see it that way.
I would imagine. I mean, listen. I think in the shock
Yeah.
of the, the revelation from your ex-wife of kind of pulling your life up by the roots, has to. I can't imagine that there's anyone walking the planet that would, if they were in what they felt was a satisfying relationship, would go dancing down the street and say, oh, okay, let's go
Yeah.
on, and Okay,
Yeah.
let's see. I'm going to go on Tinder now or something. I don't know.
Yes.
The idea is really, there's shock, but
Yes.
it because it's a death.
Yeah, and it's like William Bridges in his book on transitions. He talks about the ending and a new beginning, and in between there's this thing he refers to as the neutral zone,
Right.
which is a period of transition where the change has happened, and so there's physical changes in the real world, but your psychology hasn't caught up with the changes, and you need to
Right.
go through this psychological metamorphosis,
Yeah.
which he
Yeah.
calls the neutral zone, in which you only make temporary decisions. You don't take any actions for action's sake. You look after yourself in little ways to take care of yourself because you're fragile.
Sure.
Blah, blah, blah. There's a checklist of things, which I actually put in the book, by the way.
Yeah.
So they're in there. People want them. But yeah, so that was really important to me for me to do that.
It's when you meet yourself
Yeah.
on the road
Yeah.
and really kind of look inside. Maybe
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what you learned.
Yeah, that's a good question. My editors, who were fantastic with me when I was writing the book, helped me to shape the story. They said, make the last chapter of the book looking back and what the wisdom was that was gained. So I spent quite a long time, quite a few weeks trying to tease that out, because it sounds like an easy thing to say, but it was me in the living that. And I never thought much as I was doing it about what wisdom am I gaining. But I'd say there were 6 rules of happiness that emerged. And I can talk you through them briefly.
Please. Yes, please.
The first rule that occurred to me, and it wasn't just from the 14 years of that journey, it mainly was, but it was also informed about things I'd done earlier in my life as a CEO and other things. I'd say the first rule is what I call build a strong foundation of self-awareness. In my view, happiness comes to the people who do the work of wisely reflecting on what's happening to them in their life and ask from a place of curiosity what it means and why it's happening, and understand themselves at a deep level, understand that they are not the thoughts they have, understand that they have choices over how they respond to unfortunate and sad and difficult events, as I had to.
Yeah.
And so building that foundation of self-awareness is critical as a rule for happiness.
So, I was smiling as you were saying it because that idea of self-awareness, of really taking a look inside. We live in a society where we are ninjas at distraction, right? Anything to keep us from looking at some of those hard truths and sitting in pain or discomfort.
Yeah.
And that self-awareness is, I think that I can't think of a better number one on the list than that.
Yeah, that's the start of everything. And I would say to people, if you're not interested or not willing to put the effort into exploring within yourself, exploring it and making sense of yourself in terms of what your vision is for life, what your values are, the things that are most important to you on a daily basis, any sense of purpose or mission you might have in the world, what beliefs really empower you and what beliefs hold you back. What are your driving forces in life? Do you need certainty or variety or belonging or recognition? What do you need?
Yeah.
And things like that. This is like a dashboard of your own core, which you have to check in and look at and see where the dials are all the time, like what weekly, monthly, daily, even in some instances. So that's number one.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of practices that go with that.
In my career as a financial life planner, one of the questions that I would ask clients, what does your life look like in retirement?
Right.
And when I would get back answers, especially from men who would say, "Oh, I'm going to play golf."
Yeah, right.
It's like, okay, well, they haven't even lined up the idea of looking into self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right. It's like checked out.
Yeah, exactly. So if you've got the self-awareness, one of the things you can do, and I recommend it, rule number 2 is take full ownership for everything that happens. So my story, I had to own the fact that my ex-wife didn't want to be married to me anymore. I could have played the victim quite easily and said, it's nothing to do with me. But I looked at that situation, I thought, as much as I hate this, I'm a co-author of this event. There's something I've done or not done over a period of time that has made this outcome inevitable. So what is it? And how can I learn from it? And what do I want? Who do I want to be going forward so I don't repeat this? And what's the learning for me? And holding myself accountable in that way, I think, is a way of living that really works. It serves me well because, I think we can't control the events that happen in our lives. Clients cancel contracts, we lose our jobs, we lose our partners, people die who we wish didn't. We can only control and determine how we are in relationship to those things. And so taking full ownership, I think, is a very empowering stance in life in general. I can talk around that, but that's the rule number 2. In order to actually do that, sometimes you need to deploy rule number 3, which is to become your own observer, is how I worded it. But this is ancient wisdom. I mean, the Buddhists talked about this thousands of years ago, which is, you can be completely in your thinking, lost in it. Someone cuts across you in traffic, you're verbalizing rage straight away. You're sort of consumed by the thought of anger about that person. Or you could be in the car and sort of suddenly notice, I am feeling a lot of anger in this moment. And then I notice that I want to shout and scream about that. I'm not going to, but I notice I feel like I want to. And so you can sort of be detached from being the actor, as Tony Robbins calls it, to becoming the script writer and the director for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I was on my way to work out this morning.
Yeah.
And there's a car that was on my right, and there's clearly a red light up ahead.
Yeah.
And this guy just zooms ahead of me to the red light. And this first feeling is like, what are you, what's wrong with you? And then I caught myself and I'm like, what do I care what this guy's doing? Why am I getting triggered by his stupidity? And it's like, okay, time for me to tap my own internal brakes.
Yeah.
And laugh at myself for getting a little bit wired over someone else's stupidity.
Yeah, well, that's the job of the mind is to kind of always make sure that you're right about everything. So
Right,
it's going to judge everyone else the opposite, of course.
Exactly.
So noticing that and being aware you have a mind that is going to make those judgments, and you can actually sidestep those and say, well, thanks, mind, thanks for sharing that with me. No, I'm not going to make that response. I'm going to choose a wiser response here. I'm not going to make that response. So that's number 3. That'll get you out of a lot of trouble if you can actually embrace that. And I found that out of all the rules, that for me was the one that was the hardest to adopt and integrate fully as a practice because, oh my God, I'm the most judgmental person I've ever met. I've got judgments about everyone and everything. I'm constantly doing it, even now.
Of course, I think we all are. And I think that, that brain part is the fastest reactor, right, to everything. And our emotions are going to react faster than when our other senses can take over and say, this is not important. Why am I getting upset about it?
Yeah, exactly. It's the reptilian brain, the amygdala, when it hijacks your emotions, because it's the oldest part of the brain. It's the fight or flight survival part. Yeah. But we've got 2 other parts. We've got the limbic brain and the neocortex, and they help to regulate emotion. And so when you're in that, becoming your own observer, when you go into that mode, you actually switch to a different part of the brain, literally.
Right.
And it's a practice. It takes a lot of practice, but it's worth doing. Rule number 4 is something I've loved talking about all my life: building powerful, purposeful, and sustainable relationships. Another way of describing them is saying they're intentional relationships. So let me give you an example. Let's say you and me, let's say we were in an earlier stage of our careers and we both got jobs in the same company, in the same team even. And we sat down together on day 1, we're both new. And I say, oh, look, we're going to be working together, Michael. How do you want this to be? Do you just want us to come to work, get on with our jobs and go home? Or do you want a kind of relationship where we could, for example, give each other feedback, hear each other's dreams about their life, support and empower each other to make those dreams a reality, really challenge each other to grow and develop. And we could really create a power pact here, and have a relationship that means something, that takes us both somewhere, that's just beyond the job, but makes it life much more interesting. How would you like a relationship like that? So you're creating, you're authoring the relationships intentionally with another person. And they might say, no, I'm not interested.
Right.
Leave me alone.
Right. I think that takes a very strong willingness to be vulnerable.
Yes, it does.
To put yourself out there for, those looks of, what are you, insane? Or,
yeah,
not interested, go away. I think one has to have a very strong sense of self to be able to just put it out there without expectation.
Yeah. I mean, but when I've seen that happen, and certainly when I've experienced it myself, which is in quite a few relationships I've carried with me my whole life, it's really amazing how sustainable they've been. Well, one example, when I was traveling in the 14 years, which I wrote about in Life Without a Tour at the time, I think it was 2017. So that would have been 2 years before I came back. So year 12, I was living in Warsaw in Poland at the time. And my Polish girlfriend said, I want to be a virtual PA. And she asked me, do you know anyone in the business world who would want a PA virtually? I said, I don't know. Let me reach out to a few people in my network. And so I wrote to a lady called Claire, who had been an employee in my business for 6 years, and she was absolutely brilliant. And when the company got sold, when I had to dismantle it, I was so proud and pleased of what Claire had contributed to us that I went to a rival company very discreetly and I said, look, I've got this amazing person on my team. If you were to come forward and offer her a job so she could continue to evolve and develop what she was doing for us, you would not be sorry. She would be an absolute brilliant asset to you. I promise you. I just want to do well by her and get her a really good job. I didn't ask for any money or anything. I just wanted to know that she would be set up well as I left, because I felt that was the right thing to do. So they gave her a job and they were thrilled about it. 3 or 4 years later, I was speaking to them and they were saying how well it had worked out. And that company that she joined eventually got acquired by a larger company. So then she was out of a job again with the founder, who was also done. But the two of them decided they would start a new business. Again, in leadership development, etc. But they had a really great idea for it. And about 12 years since the last time I spoke to her, I called her and said, my girlfriend wants to be a virtual PA. Are you interested in a service like that? She said, well, not really, but I give me the details. I'll come back to you. And I just said by chance, I said, by the way, what are you up to work-wise? And she said, well, I'm launching this new company with this other lady and it's going to be doing this and this and this. And I said, gosh, that sounds amazing. I'd really like to be on the coaching team. Is there a space for me? She said, of course there is, but it'd be interesting because you were my boss for 6 years and now I'd be your boss. How would you feel about that? I said, I wouldn't mind at all. I'd be very proud and honoured to be of service to you. And I've worked with her ever since 2018. These things happen to me.
Well, the ability or the willingness to put yourself out there, to look out for somebody else, without expectation, without strings attached, and making creating those relationships and fostering them and nurturing them is something that comes back to you one way or the other, right?
Exactly. And so that was rule number 4. And rule number 5, I think this has come into the frame much more than, say, the last decade at least, but it's proactively taking care of your well-being. Now, this is something I never thought about much when I was in the earlier part of my life. Like really taking ownership for your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, and making sure you're doing all the things you need to do to stay resourced in this world. How many stories have we heard about people that have died from heart attacks, anxiety, stress, burnout, the modern world is way more challenging than I remember it as a child.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially the world of work. And so this has come high on the agenda now. Organizations have people just thinking about employee well-being. And so that is rule number 5. You've got to take care of that yourself. So that involves, for me, I have a daily meditation practice. I go on courses and do workshops and study things that help me stay mentally calm and well and things like that. I'm constantly just trying to learn more about how to manage my inner state.
Is that interesting? It's like, when we, especially when I'm thinking of men in retirement or in their chapter X and thinking about, like what is it that creates for them a life that's balanced, that's meaningful, and it has to start with self-care. I mean, that has to be the component, because without, health, without, that ability to move, to think, to act, to feel, to experience, to understand, without those things, where you going? There's only one place, and the ending is typically not pretty.
No.
So the idea of if you haven't made this part of your life, you ask yourself, well, why haven't I? Well, there was never a focus on it, right? It was just go to work, become successful, become financially secure.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly my parents were never conscious exercisers or anything like that.
Yeah. I think back to my parents. My father was a workaholic.
Yeah.
I mean, he worked had two different careers. One was a school teacher and the other was a musician. And then he did all the work around the house. He came out of the Depression and hated spending money. And so he did all the gardening, he did the plumbing, he did the painting, he did everything.
Right.
And so I guess that was his self-care.
Yeah, could probably to be in good physical shape as well, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So we're at rule, is that how many rules
So
are
that was 5.
Okay.
Now, you got to be living all of those 5 rules for number 6 to work. But number 6 is, to me, the thing that pulls it all together. And it's probably the most significant in terms of its impact on your deep sense of fulfillment. That is, rule number 6 is, once you're living that way with all those 5 rules in play, you have to find other people and empower them to do the same. Because that's how you integrate the knowing, is by helping others learn it. Then it becomes integrated in you. And, when you see someone, you probably got the experiences, when you see someone who's made a big personal shift, they start behaving differently, they give up drinking and they get well and they start living, and you can't fail to notice it. You go, what's happening to you? How come you've got a new lease of life? What the hell's happened? It's very obvious, isn't it, when someone makes such a shift?
I think when you see that, it is enlightening, it is inspiring. But there's so much noise in our society. And I talked about it in terms of distractions of, whether it's negative self-talk, whether it's being in judgment of others, whether it's death scrolling on social media or binge watching TV. This is all distractions from what's really important. And I'm interested to know, I mean, when you go from this life, marriage and business and everything else, and make that shift to saying, I want to live a more minimalist life.
Yes.
That's eliminating the noise and the distraction. What was that like for you?
Well, difficult at first because it was all I knew. I was so used to living an affluent life I was a consumer. I was like your marketer's dream. I was hooked on consumption. All the money that we created went into mostly to the house and consumption of experiences, and that were mostly things. It's things we didn't really want or need, but had to have. The latest thing, or the best furniture, or the best hi-fi or TV or whatever it was.
Right. So
and gave all that up, and that feels really really liberating, Michael, to not have be. I feel like it's like giving up an addiction. I just feel really clean.
Was it painful at first? Was it, I mean, obviously it's a disruption.
Yeah, it is.
Pattern.
It wasn't for me, I have to say. I've got to be honest. It wasn't for me because I shed everything and went to a completely different environment where I was anonymous. I just had shorts and a t-shirt and some flip-flops and a backpack. And I have to say that I really loved that anonymity and not being anyone. I loved the loss of status, literally disappearing and not having to justify myself anywhere or anything like that, or demand, better service because of some idea of myself that I thought I was someone special or something. So I used to get more of that when I lived in London, of course.
Right. So when I'm curious, when you took off for Asia.
Yeah, and and bear in mind, I was only going for 6 months in my head.
Right. But so you took off from Heathrow, I suppose. And where did you touch down?
In Bangkok.
Okay.
And it was, I remember writing about this in the book because I was thinking, I don't quite want to get off the aircraft, because as I leave this aeroplane, I'm in a new world and a new life, and there's no turning back. And
yeah, I was so curious at when your foot hit the tarmac, what that felt like for you.
It felt weird, and it was baking hot, really humid, and it was scorching. Yeah, it was a completely different climate to London, and everyone was like different looking and, different energy of the place. It was just like landing on Mars, it could have been anywhere. But
was there
bizarre.
Was there a time or a place where, you kind of felt yourself open? You kind of embraced this experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was happening little bit by little bit as I was going, but I think the big opening came for me when I did the Vipassana retreat. So you go into a monastery for 10 days and you silently sit in meditation with the monks. You don't speak to anyone for 10 days. And you're surrounded by people, so you're completely in your own space. And and it's a beautiful experience. I definitely would recommend it.
It's very funny. There's a yoga and meditation retreat place in Massachusetts called Kripalu, and they've always, and it was a monastery, and it became an ashram, and it was very austere, and because of some improprieties, they had to get rid of their leader and whatever. But anyway, so you would go there for yoga retreat, meditation, and there was no caffeine, there was no meat, but breakfast was in silence.
Yes.
And you could see, and I've been going there for years and years now, that they have caffeine and they have animal products and things like that. Also very clean and whole, but they've made these accommodations for, the times, but they still have breakfast in silence. And you could see the discomfort for many people.
Yes.
Just for a 20-minute breakfast of just being with yourself.
Yes.
Experiencing the food, the taste without conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how disruptive it is to to the nervous system.
Yeah.
It's so off pattern.
Yeah. It just made me, that whole 10-day experience made me realize just how conditioned we are in our thinking. It's like it's almost been trained to think in a very conforming way. And I never really got it until I did that. I knew, people had said that, and I kind of went, yeah, of course, that's true. But I never really got it, grokked it, as they say.
Yeah. So, as if you can maybe relate your story and your wisdom that you've accumulated, and certainly, the information, on your book and your journey will be in the show notes for people to find. But, for someone who is going into their chapter X, this next chapter where they were, they were the CEO, they were the president, they were the doctor, they were the executive, they were the business owner, and now they're a used to be.
Mm.
What advice might you offer them in terms of going into this transition with a different set of eyes?
Yeah, well, we definitely know from the testimony of people that die what they regret the most. So it's very reliable, that data. And I certainly took it on board, and I would say the same. So that would be something worth realizing, that you're not going to be unhappy if you choose to not work so hard. You might have different challenges around being financially resourced and other things. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Everyone's got to work out the ways in which they get their needs met. But I would say the start point for anyone is to really try and get the picture of where you're trying to get painted, the vision. The vision's really fundamental.
Yeah.
And all I knew was I didn't want to own and operate a business any longer. Even though I was competent at doing that, I just didn't want that responsibility in. I wanted to be free. I wanted to be a freelancer, self-employed freelance coach. I had no idea how to do it or how to make an income from it or live it or be it. I just knew that was what I wanted to do. So I set about working out how I could do that and how I could, integrate it into a life where I was doing philanthropic things, things for the community, which really made my heart sing, because Sir Ken Robinson, the late Sir Ken Robinson, was such a lovely man. I don't know if you know his work, but he was the guy who coined this phrase, being in your element, where you've got things that you are really talented at, strengths, and really what you're really good at, and then causes or things in the world you really care about, whatever that might be. And if you can work in a way that intersects these two things, you're in your element. You're going to have more energy than you've ever had, and you're going to be able to work 24/7 if you want to. You just feel so absorbed by what you're doing. That's the place to try and head to. So the question is, what is that place for you?
Yeah. And I mean, certainly for, men who are in their chapter X, whether it involves part-time work or no work at all, is, aligning their values with what they really care about.
Yeah.
And thinking about their legacy. I think that, you use the term in terms of self-awareness as the first the first stop along the trail. And I think that's just so powerful to really do that.
You've got to know what your values are. If you don't, it's very hard to vision a life.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah,
right.
You just have to know.
Right.
Yeah. For most people, it's easy to find those, because what I recommend people do is to scan back over their lifetime and to try and isolate moments, which I call peak moments, which are moments that stand out in your memory where you felt so blissfully happy or so at peace or so in the flow of life. It might just be a 1-hour event that happened 20 years ago or something, but try and not pinpoint and isolate those and make a note of them, and try and find what I call your trough moments, which are the moments where you can remember where you felt the lowest, crappiest, most unhappy you've ever felt, and try and isolate those moments and then explore what values in you were either being honored or violated in those moments. Why was that such a difficult or beautiful experience? Because in those extremes, in the troughs and the peaks, you're very aligned to your values without you even knowing it. It's like you've got a record of it in your memory.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
But it looks like, as we'll close down our conversation today, and I'm anxious to dig into your story, Life Without a Tie. And this has been a wonderful conversation, and so important and so interesting and really meaningful. And I'm hoping that, not only will the listeners go to your book and read it and understand it, but also come back and listen to this again, because there's so much, you've shared so much wisdom and important things to think about. So Ray Martin, as we close down our conversation today, I'd like to offer you the last word.
I would say, the greatest gift you can give to yourself in life is to find your true path and walk it proudly and boldly and courageously. That would be my encouragement to anyone. And I'm definitely willing to support anybody who wants to do that.
And people can find you how?
Oh, I've got lifewithoutatie.com is the website for the book. And the book's on Amazon. I'm on LinkedIn, those various places.
Wonderful. Well, Ray Martin, again, I thank you so much. This was really, truly meaningful.
Thanks, Michael. It was a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
My honor. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's show, please give us a review on iTunes. Each review helps us get our message out to more listeners so they can begin to craft their next chapter. For more information or to get in touch, visit michaelfk.com. Until next time,